B-R-A-Z-E-N.
It's early 2016, and the Rolling Stones are in a Los Angeles studio, rehearsing for an upcoming tour of Latin America.
They always rehearse in a city before they start a tour, and they take over a studio, and that becomes kind of like their business center. It's their office, and they're playing, and it's phenomenal. Like, you're literally there sitting having a meeting, and in the next room is the Rolling Stones, and they're like trying to remember how to play, like, you know, Satisfaction again. It's like, it's quite surreal, you know?
Taking a band on tour already is stressful, but Adam Wilkes has a problem. The Stones want to play Havana, Cuba, a city that's not on a typical tour itinerary. In the room with Stones management, Adam begins to list the challenges. As he does so, the music next door stops and the door opens.
I see Mick Jagger has kind of like poked his head in. So I'm like, look, I want to just make it clear, like I come with a lot of enthusiasm about the concept. I said, but like, guys, this is mission impossible, okay?
Cuba was only just starting to emerge from decades of isolation, and its communist economy was in bad shape.
Logistically speaking, like, they have nothing there. There's no electricity, there's no fuel, there's no vehicles. You'd probably have to bring in several hundred people for labor. You would have to send some guy down there, like, tomorrow to set up the Rolling Stones office in Havana and just, like, you know, pray that you could figure it out. And I remember right when I said that, Jagger kind of, like, chimed in. He's like, so when are you going? And everybody looked at me. And that's the moment in my life where I would say I had no balls. I said, right away, sir.
I'm Tom Wright, an author and podcaster.
I'm Adam Wilkes, a concert promoter. And this is Night of Show.
Last episode, we saw how John Meglen and Paul Gongaware, Adam's colleagues, helped Prince stage a comeback in 2007. In this episode of Night of Show, we're focusing on one of the Stones' most unusual live performances and how Adam, along with his colleague Brian Moscow, played a crucial role. Back then, Adam was in his 30s, and well, let's just say, a little less jaded than his more seasoned colleagues.
I got a phone call from John Meglen, my boss at the time, my friend, my mentor, and him and Paul had been touring the Rolling Stones for a number of years.
Adam had reservations about pulling off the Stones concert in Cuba in only 3 months, but he was game for the challenge, especially after Mick Jagger urged him on. John, however, was trying to wash his hands of it.
He goes, and it's like, it's just bullshit, I'm going to get stuck going to Cuba. I'm getting so good at golf, and this is going to totally fuck everything up. Where do these guys get these ideas from? And it's like this sort of like, rage boiled up in me. I was so furious. And here was this guy, the CEO of our company, and I couldn't help myself. And I said, John, if you don't think that the Rolling Stones going to Cuba and doing a free concert for the people of Havana is cool, then you have lost all of your passion in life and you should just give up. Go off and golf. And there was just this like silence on the phone, It was like a dead silence for 10 seconds. And he goes, you know what? You like Cuba so much, living in communist countries? Well, you go and do it. Click, hangs up the phone on me.
Adam has spent much of his professional life in China, managing venues and promoting concerts. He'd even studied Cuban-American relations for a semester in Havana, 2 decades earlier. To Paul and John, Adam was an expert on communism, and so the Cuba concert became his responsibility.
The thing is, we try to do what our artists want. So if Mick wants to go to Cuba, we got to try to figure out how to do that. And the answer was Adam Wilkes. I mean, you worked with, you knew how to deal with communist governments. And the biggest thing was you attended a semester of college there. You knew the town, you knew the situation. And there was like, if there was one ideal person on the planet to pull this off, it was you.
Is it fair to say that the music business is kind of like organized on the fly?
This particular situation really exemplifies that.
It's like jazz. It's just
like jazz.
Just got to go with it.
Today, the United States of America is changing its relationship with the people of Cuba.
Old Glory being hoisted up for the first time in more than 50 years.
Literally hundreds of Cubans crowded up against police barriers by the U.S. Embassy. This is a hugely symbolic...
Symbolizing the reestablishment of diplomatic relations after 54 years.
Why did Mick Jagger want to go to Cuba? Partly, it was timing. The US and Cuba in 2015 had re-established diplomatic relations after more than half a century. And there was talk of more tourism and an easing in the US economic blockade. But Jagger also wanted to make a statement. The Stones had achieved every milestone imaginable. 4 Grammys, 200 million in record sales, and a concert machine that had been minting money since 1962. Now aged 72, Jagger was still looking to push boundaries. And as he always did, keep the band in the public eye.
This was Mick Jagger's pet project. You know, from a commercial standpoint, it didn't make sense. From a logistical standpoint, it didn't make sense. It put a burden on the entire organization, but, you know, he wanted to do it.
The Stones had never really been particularly political, but they are among the world's most popular live bands, even today, with Mick Jagger close to 80. And they'd toured some weird places in the past. In 1967, at the height of the Cold War, the Stones had played in Poland, which ended in police attacking fans outside the venue.
Zresztą tego się nie słucha, to się przeżywa. Tak przynajmniej nakazuje obowiązujący tu wszystkich rytuał.
Mounting a concert in Cuba with a similarly authoritarian government was going to be a headache, Adam realized. Gregory Elias, a businessman in Curacao, a Caribbean island, had agreed with the Stones to fund the $5 million needed to put on the free concert. Elias sent a private jet to fly Adam and a small team from Miami to Havana, where they had meetings with Cuban government officials. Adam roped in his old University of Havana professor to translate, but his team was out of its depth.
And our first crisis was that we ran out of money. Because very naively, we were not aware that American credit cards don't work there. We can't even pay for dinner. And as we start to it's a small town and we're making some noise and we're starting to meet a lot of people, it started to be like this weird thing. I'm like, look, here's the deal. Like, it's going to be the biggest thing in the world. I think you could be a big part of this. There's a big role for you. Can you buy dinner tonight? I'll get the next dinner. I'll have another beer. But yeah, you got this one, right? Like, that kind of behavior is only going to go so far. And it starts to become like a real big problem. And that's when I called Brian Moscow, one of my colleagues, because I needed money. So I called Brian. I said, Brian, I'm on a special mission. I'm on a top secret mission. Do you speak Spanish?
No.
Yeah. And I said, Brian, it's Adam. I'm on a top secret mission. Do you speak Spanish?
See.
I said, good. I said, fly to LA. I need you to find this person in the accounting department, and I need $50,000 in cash, and then fly to Havana.
What?
And I said, just go.
Okay.
So Brian arrives with the money, which they stash in a hotel safe. The government had put Adam and team in the presidential suite of the Hotel Nacional, an imposing Art Deco edifice on the waterfront.
And this is the famous hotel that Meyer Lansky, the American gangster, used to own, and it was the main casino in town. And it's this architecturally beautiful building, but it's also semi-dilapidated, and the presidential suite was like spectacular in a very sort of wacky and somewhat cheesy way. And we could not get one Cuban person to go in the room. Like, no matter what we did, the people we're like, oh, let's have a meal. Great. Well, we're at the Hotel Nacional. Great. Oh, come up. We're in the presidential suite. No, I can't. Nope. And finally, we realized that this is where they would put the foreign dignitaries, and it was famously bugged. And it's just like the entire room was like a listening device.
So they moved to another hotel and began planning. Cuba had almost no experience of rock concerts. Castro had famously banned the Stones in the 1960s as a symbol of Western decadence. But relations with the West had thawed, and in 2005, Audioslave had played to 70,000 people in Havana. But the Rolling Stones was going to perform to at least 500,000. And Cuba, well, Cuba had seen nothing like this.
So typically the way a concert works is that you bring, items 1 through 5, and items 6 through 10 are local. So you'll bring, the lights and the sound, but they have electricity. And they have trucks to take your lights and sound off the plane. They have fuel to put in the trucks. They have cranes. They have cables. They have water. As we get further and further along, they don't have anything. It's not like, oh, we forgot the cable. Let's go down to Home Depot and get the cable. They don't have there's no Home Depot. There's no cable store. There was at one point we needed a toilet. And it was right around the showtime. We urgently needed a toilet. And we literally...
It's like a porta toilet.
We just needed a toilet.
Toilet.
We paid someone $200 to disassemble the toilet in their house, to build it there, and then we gave it back to them. It was that kind of stuff.
The team scoured Havana, begging for supplies. Here's Jim Allison, who worked with Adam on the show.
One day we were driving by a place where there was a show 2 days before, and we saw they had left their generator there. So we got out of the car, went over, saw, oh, it's a new generator. Oh, it's still got fuel in it. Great. Okay, remember where that is. Tell the team to go get it. So we sent a truck over to borrow that generator, and we brought it back afterwards.
The team arranged a state-of-the-art concert without email, working on basic Nokia phones from the 1990s.
The one with the snake game on, I had that one.
I think a good point to bring up is, most of our phones didn't have internet.
I don't think I used email the entire time.
And they still hadn't secured a venue. Havana doesn't have multi-purpose spaces like the Crypto.com Arena or Madison Square Garden. They'd need to build a stage, but even choosing a location was politically fraught.
So we had looked at all different locations. One was this Revolutionary Plaza, and they were like, you can't do it there, which actually would have been perfect, but that's where Fidel Castro would make the famous speeches and stuff, and it's a political forum. Right. So we ended up in a field.
It's basically a recreational sports field.
The venue, the Ciudad Deportiva, was set. Adam's team swelled to scores of people.
Everything was I don't want to say locked and loaded, but it was looking pretty good.
Then Adam had a strange meeting with Jeffrey De Laurentiis, the senior U.S. diplomat in Cuba. The meeting was in the recently reopened U.S. Embassy.
We kept sort of questioning, when's the show taking place? And I'm like, oh, it's going to be on March 18th. Are you sure? And I said, well, I'm hopefully sure. With a lot of things to figure out. Can't change the date, right? And I was like, well, no, that's the only date. And he was asking me all these questions in the way that a diplomat would, sort of saying everything except saying it. I remember leaving. I was like, that was a particularly strange meeting. It didn't feel like they were here to help.
Did the US have something against the Stones playing in Cuba? Why not support this concert? A few days later, Adam had his answer.
President Obama expecting to make a historic trip to Cuba next month.
An important step forward in signaling this new beginning.
The first time in 88 years.
This week we made it official. I'm going to Cuba.
President Obama would be landing in Cuba just 2 days after the Stones were supposed to play their concert. A Cuban government official called Adam in a panic.
And they were just very straightforward. They said, look, we just cannot have, logistically, a U.S. president come here and the Rolling Stones come here in the same week. We don't have enough cars. We don't have enough fuel. We don't have enough hotel rooms. And it's the whole thing just fell apart. And there we were, that we were in so deep.
Adam called his colleague Paul Gongower.
So I started talking to Paul, and I started to realize that there was a lot of people in the Stones organization that were relieved it wasn't happening. It was Mick Jagger really can't say anything now because it's just not happening. It's too bad. He'll have to live with it. And I had this call with Paul, and he was like, look, dude, it's over. And I made this deeply impassioned plea. I said, you can't give up right now. I've committed myself to this. It's a bit like Donnie Brasco, you go so deep undercover, you lose track of like right and wrong. I had become like a Cuban government official, and I was just like, I couldn't accept it. And he said to me, sort of like somewhat blowing me off maybe, but somewhat maybe as words of advice, he goes, you get Joyce on the phone, and Joyce is the manager, and he goes, you don't let her get off the phone until she says yes.
By this point, Adam's been 2 months in Cuba. He's been eating on the fly, drinking a lot, and hardly sleeping. He hasn't seen his infant daughter or his wife. Today he's gym fit with a flowing mane of salt and pepper hair. In a photo from Cuba, he looks haggard, with an unruly beard. In desperation, he calls Joyce Smith, the Stones' manager, asking for a week's delay. The Stones weren't getting paid for Havana, but it costs around $5 million per week to keep the band on the road. Hotel rooms, salaries for 150 crew members, food, fuel, that kind of thing. The initial cost of the show was already $5 million. With a week's delay, it had just doubled to $10 million.
So Joyce said that if we could find the money, which we would have to find like roughly within 48 hours, she would tentatively agree.
Paul pitched in to save the concert.
We just didn't want to let go of it. We just had to keep going. We figured out, pushing back a week, what that was going to cost, and it was within, that's when the Stones, I think, threw in everything because they wanted it to happen so badly. They didn't want to miss this. And that's when we got really close, and that's when John and I, took the last little bit of the risk to get it in there.
Gregory Elias, the Curaçao businessman, who already was financing the show, agreed to stump up some of the extra $5 million. And Adam and his colleagues wrangled other money from investors. The show was back on, set for March 25th, which that year was Good Friday.
Our producer saw the president's plane coming past our location here. Now it's touchdown.
The president and first lady and their daughters coming off Air Force One in Havana, Cuba.
The full day of Barack Obama's visit to Havana opened with a ceremony.
I mean, like, there's some times that there's some places in the world where, like, it's just indisputable. Like, if there's one place in the world to be at that time, it's there. And that might be like the World Cup final or something like that, At that moment, from when Obama was there until the Stones were there, there was absolutely nowhere else in the world where anybody could look out on the map and say there'd be a better place to be than Havana. Havana was
parties every night?
No.
Well, not for us.
Not for you.
But it was like, like DiCaprio was there and Richard Branson, all these.
Where were they staying? Were they on yachts?
I don't fucking know. I remember like people were like, we have to make a VIP section for DiCaprio. I'm like, tell him to go in the fucking audience with everybody else. We didn't have a VIP section. There was no VIP section.
Communist country.
Unless you were Raul Castro. He probably had a VIP section.
By this point, the stage is under construction with huge LED lights. Hundreds of crew are on site. The Stones' pre-arrival team is already in situ. And then?
6 days out, I wake up to a phone call from the Minister of Culture.
The minister said he needed to come over immediately to Adam's hotel. The minister arrives and Adam takes him into a conference room.
And he says, well, the Pope called Raul Castro. And I'm just like, oh God, you gotta be kidding me. The Pope called Raul Castro last night, and he's really upset that we're doing this like rock and roll concert on Good Friday. It just doesn't seem like, right by him. The Pope asked Raul, would he mind moving the concert back a couple of days? So Raul, called me and he wanted me to ask you. And I'm like, I wonder if I understood that correctly in Spanish, or did I just make that up? Because could that have possibly just been said to me?
Initially banned by the communist government, the Catholic Church had gained influence in Cuba. Just a year earlier, Pope Francis had visited, and he met with Fidel Castro. And it's why the Pope took such an interest in this concert. Pushing down a rising anger, Adam responds that it's too late to delay any longer. And the meeting breaks up.
And then they come back, a couple hours later again, and This is like after work, and I think I probably had a few drinks at this point, and they said, "No, we got an idea." I'm like, "Okay, what do you got?" And they said, 12:05. I said, what do you mean 12:05? They're like, the concert, it starts 5 minutes after midnight because it's Saturday. It's no longer Good Friday. And I was like, hold on a second. So the Pope calls Raul Castro, and you're going to beat him on a technicality? Do you want to know what the Rolling Stones are doing at 12:05? I said, they're sleeping. They're like 80 years old. All right? So let me ask you a question. Do you want to be the country that's opening to the world on the back of normalized relations with the U.S., inviting the Rolling Stones here to perform for free for the people of Cuba? Or do you want to be the guys that killed Keith Richards? I said, you stew on that. Let me know what you want to do. And I was like, put my drink down and I left.
I'm sure Keith Richards isn't going to be killed by staying up past midnight.
Keith Richards would have been fine. Just from a photo standpoint, he looked the oldest, you know?
But even the Pope didn't have the sway to stop the Stones. Joyce, the band's manager, stepped in. Paul remembers.
I definitely remember we were in the middle of it and trying to figure it out. And Joyce really came up with a solution. You know, she just said, Rolling Stones aren't political and they're not religious in any way. We don't hold any of those beliefs. We're rock and roll. And, you know, we've never bowed to that sort of pressure before. We're not going to do it now. And the government relented.
The concert was all set to proceed, and Havana was electric.
We're very pleased to be here, and I'm sure it's going to be a great show.
The Rolling Stones touched down in Havana ahead of a huge free concert tonight.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones!
Fans began to stream in from all over the country. There was an estimated 700,000 people in the field by the time the Stones took to the stage, among the largest concerts ever held. I've waited 50 years to see them, said this Cuban fan. Since I couldn't see the Beatles, I'll see the Rolling Stones. And the performance would certainly not disappoint. The Stones are famous for never giving a bad show, but Mick Jagger, dressed in a bright pink shirt and sequin jacket, performed with even more swagger than normal that evening. The band played 18 songs over 2 hours, which was recorded as a concert film, Havana Moon. Afterward, Jagger was ecstatic.
It was a great concert. It was amazing. Very enthusiastic crowd. Yeah. And they seemed to know all the songs.
For Keith Richards, the show held a deeper meaning.
You could feel in the air that there was something special going on. Incredible country, and the energy there is quite amazing, and I just hope that the changes that are coming come in the right way, you know.
The hope of those days has dimmed. The blockade remains. But for a moment that evening in Havana, a group of people felt part of something more significant than a rock concert.
There was a feeling in the city, there was a moment in time that everybody there recognized that this was something they had never seen in their life, and maybe they would never see again. Not just a rock and roll spectacle as much as this incredible moment of potential change and hope. For the band that had done everything, it was a feather in their cap to stage something that really would be very hard for anybody else to replicate. A testament to who the Rolling Stones are.
It goes back to remembering those days with Fidel and when their music was banned in Cuba and when people got thrown in jail for listening to the Rolling Stones, and for that transformation of people's mindset, you know, into things are actually changing and they're improving. This was the catalyst for a major upheaval of thinking, I guess you'd have to say, in Cuba. And the Stones wanted to do that. And I think they knew that something would happen as a result of that. Mick is always looking for something new, something different.
The Stones closed the show with a rapturous performance of Satisfaction, as the crowd, maybe 1 million strong, felt the elation of the moment. Jagger bowed and walked off the stage.
We would normally just go into his car, and he saw me, and he walked across the field towards me.
As the pair stood there, the promoter and the rock legend. Relief washed over Adam. Back in the LA studio, Jagger had all but ordered Adam to fly down to Cuba. The gambit had paid off.
And he said to me, I know how hard this must have been for you and what you and your team went through to put this event together. And I just want to let you know that I recognize that, and I want to let you know how much that means to me. And I deeply thank you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Coming up next week on Night of Show.
This is Michael Jackson, dude. He has it in his soul, in his blood.
I begged him. If you don't do it, I can't live here anymore.
The King put the military on the hotel. We weren't going anywhere until we played the show.
I said yes to everything. Yes.
We want to hear from you. Perhaps you experienced a life-changing moment at a concert or meeting one of your favorite artists. Send us your best stories via voice message at nightofshow.com/contact. That's nightofshow.com/contact. We'll include the best of them on future episodes, and you stand to win Night of Show merch, also available on the show's website, nightofshow.com. Thanks for listening. Night of Show is a production of Project Brazen in partnership with PRX. It's written and presented by me, Tom Wright, and Adam Wilkes. The executive producers are Adam Wilkes, Paul Gongaware, John Meglin, Tom Wright, and Bradley Hope. Sandy Smollins is the executive producer for Audiation. The story editor is Joe Levy. Mariangel Gonzalez is senior producer. Matthew Rubenstein is the producer. Dialogue edit, theme, and original music by William Whitman. Mixing and additional scoring by Paul Vitolins at Audiography. Lucy Woods is head of research. Ryan Ho is the creative designer for the project, with cover art design by Julien Pradier. Clearance counsel is Inez Smolansky, Esquire.
Audiation.